EXO.
Yeah.
I remember seeing a video of his going to, what's it called? I don't know if it was Sundown or something.
Probably.
And
he said, hey, can you zap it more? And then it actually arced across the gap. Yeah, that's too much voltage. Yeah, that's completely saturated. Yeah.
Yeah, I seen that one, and I was wondering, I was trying to understand what did they mean about that. I was trying to understand that.
It's just like it's like, you know, when you fill the glass, like when you fill a glass with water, you can only go as big as the glass. If the glass can't hold any more water, it's going to overflow, and that's what happens when you overcharge them. It just goes back to the system.
When I was in school, I did a project of magnetics.
Yeah.
But it's not nothing like this. You have to make your own magnet, like if it was like a little.
Right. Usually, you just wrap a piece of wire around a piece of steel or something like that. Yep.
See, and I understood that, but I didn't understand what they were talking about. That's why I was curious.
Yeah.
You know, I guess the more you understand, the better it is on the function of.
Well, like you start to observe, like, you know, why are the magnets moving, that sort of thing, and then also, the more you build out, like you realize, even though like if this was made of neo, again, you're only limited to a 2-inch coil.
Yeah.
So it can only hold maybe 600 watts, maybe 650 if it's neo, and even that is like it's passband dedicated. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because I started making my own coils. I don't know if you remember that.
No, that's good.
And so far at the first, I had a lot of failures.
Yeah, well, that's how you learn.
And now the ones that I've been doing, I haven't really had anybody come back and say, "Hey, my coils are not good."
And that's the real measure of whether or not it's good is the final product. And that's why it's funny whenever people complain, oh, there's glue drips or whatever, or, you know, my magnets look homemade or whatever it is. So what? How does the woofer perform? And then when you can measure all of them with the WT3 or the DATs, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So it's like, there. So, but I was just making a video here to kind of record this, but somebody asked me to make a video real quick. So, you can keep working.
Already done.
Yeah. Oh, okay. What was it? Basically, this is a cabinet full of capacitors.
Okay.
Now, this particular setup, let me turn this off. This particular setup, they use 1500 volt capacitors. Now, one night I left this running overnight, and then we heard a big explosion. I thought it was some crackheads back here that were trying to get in there because there's a lot of copper bars in there as well. And I was like, oh shit, they saw the copper, they're coming for the copper. And no, one of them just got old. And so what I did was I went in and just disconnected that. It was I think it's 4 or 5 in a row. And it fucked up the cabinet. Like I had to bypass the safety locks and all that kind of stuff. And to get it to work, because this is the control module. So basically there's 3 sections for a magnetizer, which is your energy storage. In this case, we're using capacitors in DC as a discharge mechanism, like a battery, like a capacitor bank. That's what it is. And then you have your switcher, which in this case it's a voltage controller. So what you do is when this thing is off, you can adjust the voltage to whatever you want. On some of the bigger magnets, I go all the way up to 1100. And
kind of like a voltage regulator.
Well, yeah. Well, and what it does is it charges up the capacitors to whatever voltage I set it to.
Yeah.
So, and they're good up to 1500 volts. You don't want to find that as they get older, they get drier and they don't hold as much charge. So you don't want to really push that as best as you can. You usually want to be at about 50% duty cycle. So if it's a 1500 volt capacitor, you don't really want to go above 750 and it'll last a really long time.
Okay.
But so when I was using this, this is a coil of wire. So then you have your discharge mechanism, and that's what this does. This actually just this is your switch control. So it controls all the current that flows out of here and then through the cables and then into the coil. So when I originally had it, it was this coil, and that was Orion's original one. They did the XTR subs, they did the HCCA subs with this thing. And I don't like this version. This is the same version that they use at, I think, Phi. This is the type they use. And also they use this one at Sundown. The reason why I don't like it is because it's unpredictable. Now, if you look at the one on Sundown, they actually have like padding on the inside and outside to keep the magnets from moving around and jumping and things like that. So that's why I went with this one here. This is that. This one uses high voltage. It takes a 3-phase, and I'm pretty sure it steps it up. I'm not sure, totally positive, but this thing compensates by having a lot more coil and steel laminate in the gap. So this one just has the coil, and I'm sure they use some sort of ferrite core, steel laminate core or something like that, because it's very, very heavy. And that's one way to do it, and most people do it this way because it's cheaper. This part is very fucking expensive, and it's again, I got this one from Concept, from the Concept buyout. This is the same one that Ari Audio used. David Moore, when I met him back in 06, he was using a version of this, who was owned by, what's his name, dipshit in California. He ended up buying all the Ari Audio returns, and he got their Magnetizer too. He goes by Land Cruiser XMO or something like that. I forgot his name. Anyways, so this version compensates by having a lot more material in the gap, in 8 of the gap, and it also uses 2 coils. So, and then what you do is you wire these in, you can wire them in series or parallel. I did them in parallel, and it definitely extracts a lot more current. But the whole purpose of using this as my discharge coil is to not jump. So and you can control that in a couple of different ways. You can also control that in the voltage. Yeah. So it's supposed to be more efficient when you wire in series. We talked about that, about having more windings in the gap if you wire in series. Yeah. So it makes the amplifier more, or not the amplifier, it makes the motor more efficient. And that's what this does too. So I want very little movement or whatever. So, but again, it depends on the potential. Typically the first jump is the hardest, because you're transforming a non-magnetic material into magnetic. And then if you discharge again, it has less movement because it's already polarized. Yeah. So sometimes what you do is then you can do it twice, and then it completely saturates it, and then it's not going to get any more chargy. It's not going to get a higher voltage or a higher charge than that. Also, you're limited by the material. So this is probably just regular Y30, which is really, really, really good quality. These were from Concept, and once you hit a certain voltage, that's it. They're good for that, and that's the end of it. It doesn't actually matter how much you have. It matters a little bit, not as much as you think it would be. Mm-hmm. So like when you take something like the ZV6, you go, well, that handles more power, and it's like there's a lot more to it than just a bigger magnet or more material, but it kind of helps. Again, because of the material type, you can't really get any higher, I don't want to say voltage, but it would probably be measured in magnetic potential, which is a Gauss. And so that would be where that comes in. And it also helps with thermal mass. So it's going to get hot. This little magnet, this is good for a 2-inch coil. This whole thing is going to get hotter quicker than, say, a ZV6, because the ZV6 has a lot more material, magnetic material. So, but just to recap, what you need is a source voltage, and this gets charged up with just line voltage, 220 in, and then it charges it up to whatever DC. It rectifies it and charges it up to whatever. There's big giant resistors in there for charge and discharge. It's kind of a neat machine, but it's actually very, very fancy compared to what you need. And that's where, like, if you look at the one that I think the one that Tilo made was just a little bit smaller than this table, and he just had capacitor banks down on the bottom and then on top, and again, that depends on your voltage of the capacitors. You can get away with smaller capacitors if they have a higher voltage.
But where do you get those capacitors though?
You can just buy them from China.
Do you?
Yeah. So these particular ones are made in America. So, but a lot of that manufacturing has gone away, and so you can just buy. Now, you typically don't want to buy something like a super capacitor, just because it's such a low voltage, and then you would have to use many ones in series to get the voltage that you're looking for. So again, that's where you get into this flip-flop of higher voltage versus higher current. And so I want a higher voltage so that it's more it's more stable. The discharge is not as violent. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's what I'm looking for. Now, if I'm incorrect in any of this stuff, please correct me. But there's not a lot of knowledge, about this. Now, there's a lot of. I'm sure there's a lot of. I'm sure there's a lot of videos and white papers on magnetics, but not on this particular application. Typically, you would see them for like right now. You would probably see for tokamak. Yeah. For fusion reactors. Yeah, so that's where you want to have a really high potential magnet, is to control a big field. Now, what would really be interesting is, are those permanent magnets, or are they energized by a coil of wire or some other field? Yeah. Right?
Yeah, cause I have seen some of them that they make, like, but it's like for the people they grab the scraps.
Oh, for the Neo. Well, yeah. That's an electromagnetic one where it's like probably the most famous version of that was from Breaking Bad. Yeah. When they got it, they borrowed the magnet from the junkyard, and then they energized it. They zapped it with like 30 batteries or whatever, all in series, with a really high voltage, and you can do that kind of damage with that kind of high voltage. And what's funny is that you just don't want to exceed typical high voltage is 600 volts. You don't want to go over that, but just because the enamel or the insulation on the wires is only good up to 600 volts. Now, once it goes beyond that, then it starts looking at the voltage, the electricity starts looking at the proximity. What's the spacing on these? How much does it take to arc? You know that. Typically, it's about 10,000 volts per inch of air gap. So so this would have to get really high voltage in order to jump not only the insulation, but then the air as well. Yeah, you can do it. It is possible, but it's not, that's not something that you're going to see in something like this. But the three elements are in this version, this one just has a forward and reverse, and then it also has, let's just say it uses line voltage, and if you wire all three phases in series or whatever, and you're tapping off the first and third, it would be, I think, 380. Yeah, so 380, or no, this one says 240. So 240 volts, three phase. No, is that? That's weird. I was told this one uses three phase. I may be wrong. I don't know. I'd have to, again, a lot of these companies have gone belly up, so there's not really like a manual anymore about what they focus on. But if I remember right, I actually had to pay an electrician in California to pull it from the panel, and it was three phase. That's why I didn't do it. So, but I'm just using it as a discharge coil. The way that they used this one, when I saw David Moore use it, which was, it would just take, say, three phase in, it rectifies it to a DC current, but it's only momentary. And so he was standing up nails in that field when he turned it on. Yeah, but you could turn it on and leave it on. Not that it saturates it anymore, because the saturation is really about the current plus the voltage. And so that creates how big of a field, how powerful the field is. This is going to be more efficient because it has a lot more material. So this is like using, if you're looking at sound systems, this is like using a really badass 18, right? Which is pretty powerful. And then this would be using like 20 12s. Like the 12 is not as strong, but all together it's more powerful than the single 18. If that makes any sense.
You have more.
Yeah. So, but so to build your own magnetizer, you just need a source of electricity, and that can either be stored in DC, or you can do AC and just rectify it. And then you need a switcher, a switch control. Now this switch control, you can vary voltage if you want. Typically, if you're just making your own, what you want to do is just use a bridge rectifier to rectify mains, which in most households is 220, 240 volts. So you'd rectify the rails directly to 240 volts DC, and then you need a switching mechanism. Now the switching mechanism in this one is SCRs. So SCRs are like really big MOSFETs, MOSFET banks, and then they heat sink them all. And inside there, I think there's some heat sinking down below. But go ahead and Google SCR, and you can get different voltage types, different current types, and it's basically a solid state relay. And so you can use one little switch to trigger all of them all at once. Another way to do it is to use really big and beefy solenoids. But the problem is getting all the solenoids to contact at the same time. So one time from when we were I was having the homeless people dumpster dive behind Rockford, and they brought in a bank. It was like 6 500 amp relays all wired in parallel. I was like, it looked like they were making, like Drew and Wayne were making their own magnetizer, just as something temporary. Yeah, maybe to do whatever. And your switcher is also going to have a voltage limit on what you can do for voltage. So you got to make sure that if you're using a relay, or if you're using even just a really big piece of copper, something to switch it like temporarily. That's another way to go. You don't necessarily have to use capacitors to store the charge, but you want to have something that is reliable and repeatable as far as the discharge part, because otherwise it's going to burn up on the first try and then you're done. The way that they did it in some of the smaller magnetizers that I bought over the years was they used, I don't know if you've ever seen those, it's a mercury switch. Sometimes they use them on trunks. Sometimes they sell them as part of car alarms, where like if the car tilts up, then what happens is the mercury runs to the end of the tube, and it's a vacuum tube, and then there's two terminals inside there, and when the terminals connect, then that means that the car is in tow, and so it would bypass or whatever. But basically it was it's about as big as probably like a 3-gallon bucket. And not quite a 5-gallon, again, depending on your charge. And then what it would do is just move it, and it was called a mercury vapor type of switch, mercury vapor switch. And you don't want those out in the public, and also if they break open, it's kind of deadly. And so they've moved away from that, but that's what they used a long time ago to do when the flask was pulled into a vacuum. Yeah. So that way there's no oxygen in there. Typically you don't want arcing, you want all the transfer, the current transfer to transfer the mercury. But that's it. They just use a lot of mercury, and then if you're using it constantly, then sometimes the heat would build up and you want to put a fan on it to dissipate some of the heat. But basically the idea is to have your source, your switch, and then your discharge. Now your discharge can be, you can make this at home. You can make it out of an ML wire, and basically you just experiment. One of the best things is probably, I would actually use like a steel hub from a tire. You cut out the center, so that way you place the magnet, whatever, inside the hub, and then on the outside of the wheel hub, the tire, it's not the tire, it's the wheel part. You wrap copper, and use like it doesn't have to be a large gauge, because you're only doing it for momentary. So you could use some regular insulated primary wire, like 18 gauge, 16 gauge. You can use an ammo wire too. You just got to be real careful not to chip it up or anything like that. But again, you can use any piece of it, and then when you do a splice, you just want to splice it real nice and neat, make sure it's insulated, and then keep wrapping. And the more wraps you get, the more it's going to be able to saturate. It also creates a resistance. So sometimes you may want to do, just like on a voice coil, you want to do a bifiliar. So you do 2 18 gauge wires in parallel around to make for a larger gauge wire. You can just do a single gauge if you want. That's another way to do it as well. So it depends on, again, how much current you're doing. And because you're making this yourself, typically you just got to experiment. It's best if you read books, lots and lots of books and white papers on different applications for making a magnet, so you can calculate your Tesla meters of charge or whatnot. But for the most part, that's all you really need. And I can see if I can find some pictures on the old TC Sounds website on the Internet Archive of T.C.O.Z magnetizer. And so on his though, it was just an open cart with, you could see the capacitors like that, and then he had like a discharge coil like right there, and it was just all in one part. Yeah. And I think he had it on a mobile cart so he could take it around. Yeah, and then you just run an extension cord to plug it in. But the problem with having it open like that and not in a cabinet is for safety reasons. If one of those capacitors explodes, it could take out an eye, and in the case of Tilo, it took out his ear. So it busted his eardrum, and then he can't hear out of that for the rest of his life. So you typically, you know, when you start getting in those bigger voltages and bigger powers, bigger discharge, you want to have a cabinet of some sort. And again, you can modify something like this where you just, I mean, you would need multiples if you want to make one at home. It's like milk crates, and then you just wire them all in parallel. So this would be a capacitor bank, put a couple terminals out, wire them with some heavy duty wire, and you just wire them all in parallel. You can also make your own capacitors as well if you really want to go. I've talked to a couple of guys in South Africa where they don't have access to, like, it's too expensive for them to ship something from China. And then also China has like a minimum, you know, like they want 50 grand or 60 grand plus shipping, plus tariff. It's like, it's not worth them paying the money, so they might as well make it themselves. So, and as far as making capacitor goes, capacitor is just 2 collector plates. You can just use aluminum foil, and then you want to have a dielectric in between that isolates them from touching. And then you want to have an electrolyte like salt water, and you can basically roll your own capacitors. So there's a method that I came up with that I want to do on my own, and I can show you in another video. But I just wanted to show you the magnetizer for this. If you wanted to make your own magnetizer, again, it's best to just have an idea of what's going on. You don't have to copy this, but you want to look at the way that other people have solved that problem of getting all that energy focused into a tiny little coil to create that magnetic field. And what you are creating is an EM pulse. That's exactly what that is. It's an EM pulse, electromagnetic pulse. So now, as far as it erasing the credit cards in your pocket, I don't know. I don't think so. We used to stand on this one, and it would zap our nuts all the time and all that stuff. If you talk to old people, they actually believe that you can put a magnetic coil on your skin and then zap it with like a little 9-volt battery and a high voltage step-up transformer for like a capacitor bank that's in like disposable cameras, and then it kills the bugs, the bad bugs. I'm like, it sounds like maybe it would kill all the bugs, but whatever. So, but for a little bit, I was going to form an LLC where we have old people come in and we just lay them on a bed, and then we sit there and magnetically treat them. It was called Mesa Magnetics. And again, I was just using it as a write-off, and also for silliness. So like the other one is like, I want to come up with a LLC called Cum Dumpsters. So that way, if I ever get in trouble, they're like, the state versus cum dumpsters. I'm like, what's up? That's me. Yeah. That's the kind of the jokes I like. But I'll let you get back to work, and then thanks for helping me out, man. So, but I just wanted to do this video and I saw you working. I was like, this is perfect. So.